challenged myself to build a farm for every animal in the Barnyard Animal Pack for Planet Zoo. To spice things up, I only have 5 days to complete an entire farm. This is coming from someone who has never completed a zoo. And I mean ever. Thankfully, Frontier kindly gave me early access so I could get a head start on this challenge. Now, where to begin? We all know how important entrance buildings are, and this is why I completely decided to go in another direction. So I decided to start with one of my favourite animals from the pack, the Tamsworth pig. Side note, I desperately wanted a potbelly pig when I was younger, but alas, my parents would never let me take it home. So instead, I decided to build a hard shelter for our pig friends. A place where they could rest their heads after a long day basking in the Scottish sunshine, or lack of. With the enrichment items in and our essentials set up, including a cosy bed, our first habitat was complete. Only 6 more to go. With the pigs in place, it was time to think about our guest. Now, I don't know about you, but there's something about looking at a pig that makes me think bacon, or hot dogs. So I decided to build just that. A place you can go for all your hot dog needs. Just don't ask where we get the meat from. And yes, I did check the menu. There is a non-meat alternative for you veggie vegan lovers. It was time to turn this farm into, well, a farm. I sectioned an area off of the park and filled it with heavy mud. I then added hay bales and a tractor from the workshop. The link is in the description. And with all of that, the end of the day was complete. Stick around for day 2, where we build 2 more enclosures for our Banyard animals. I know, you can't contain your excitement, but please try. You might scare off the animals. As the sun came up on day 2, it was time to start building a habitat for the sheep. I was heavily inspired by this photo here and wanted to replicate it in Planet Zoo. At this stage, I wasn't necessarily worried about adding in all the little details. The pipes for the water system, although someone did point out, is that a massive towel rail? No, it's not. But now you see it, it's pretty hard to unsee it. So thanks. Next, I wanted to add in the janky looking porchway and also extend the building. Once I had this in place, it was time to add in the clutter, or detailing. Now, you may be sitting there wondering, Gemma, what inspired you to create this farm? Well, that's a great question, with a very boring answer. Personally, I find theming to be the best thing in Planet Zoo. I love it. And the best theme that I can ever think of is the Wild West. So with that in mind, I decided to build the perimeter of our sheep habitat and then start adding foliage. Now, for those that aren't familiar with my channel, I do have a saying, which is, a tree is a tree. Meaning, I am not the best person when it comes to gardening. I literally spam down the same rocks, foliage, and just basically do it until it looks good. And sometimes that can mean there's a lot of repetition. More rocks, more foliage, and maybe a tree. And there we have it, our extremely overgrown, lush habitat for our sheep is complete. Is there too many bushes? Probably. Does it look good? Debatable. Or yeah, sure, fine, it looks good. Moving on. It was off to the races with our next habitat. I mean, do they race donkeys? I'm sure they do somewhere. I just wanted to spam down as many pieces from the new Barnyard Animal Pack as I possibly could, which included a lot of these hay bales. Is it excessive? Yes. Does it look good? I do actually think it does look good this time. In fact, it looks so good that I actually used this style of building for our entrance, which you will see a little bit later on. I then added a chimney made out of arc-shaped pieces, and more rocks and foliage just to make it look less dull. Then I moved on to creating the hard shelter for the donkeys. I then moved everything into place and then used the terrain paint to make everything look a little bit better. I added some windows to the remaining buildings and a couple of prop pieces just to tie everything in, including this really awesome well. I then put in a stone pathway and tidied everything up. With the donkey habitat complete, it was time to think of the guests. Again. This time I decided to create a farmer's market, a place where the farm could sell their produce and you could pick up a fresh strawberry or two. Next I wanted to build some generic stalls, something that could be used around the farm. just purely for building constraints, not like I had a million hours to sink into this. So I decided to build one stall and one stall only. One stall to rule them all. The purpose of this was to be a little shack, something that was probably built on the farm and relatively cheap to maintain, as most shacks are. You can pick up a chief beef, a cosmic cow milkshake, which actually happens to be the sponsor of this park, and a gift shop behind the market for just a memento. With the end of day 2 coming in sight, it was time to think about the farmer. Well, of course they had to live on the farm, so I decided to build a farmhouse. A place that had a roaring fire and a homely cooked meal on the table. A place that you can relax after a hard day's work. And I have included the second best thing I have ever built in Planet Zoo. Yes, a washing line. You're welcome. As you can imagine, being based out in the countryside, the plumbing system is questionable. So the solution is to have a septic tank. It's so glamorous. So that's what I built. After all the glitz and glamour, it was time to focus back on the house. By adding some cozy vibes with some planters outside, our farmhouse was complete. As I approached day 3, I knew that we were halfway through the project, and to be honest, at this stage, everything was going pretty well. My only real concern was how I was going to edit this whole entire thing, which is what I'm doing right now, but you will see this when it's finished, so let's get back to the build. So this building here is again inspired by images that I have found on the Tinternet, or the internet. Now, don't ask me what this building is or what this mechanism I am building on the top here. I have no idea. Again, I have just taken reference images. So it's got a bit of a pulley system here, there's a couple of ropes, so use your own imagination as to what the heck this is, because literally I have no idea. However, being inspired by mechanisms that I still have no idea what they're used for, I decided to include some logs, because why not? And to fill up the space at the back here, I decided to put in a little pond area, and I thought this would be absolutely perfect if we included some swans. Not necessarily part of the Barnyard Animal Pack, but I think that they'll make great friends with our goats. Talking of goats, it was time to start on their habitat. I knew that the goat habitat was going to be probably one of my biggest and most challenging builds. What is quite a shame with this is that currently in game, and they may change this in the future, but the goats don't actually use the enrichment item which the mountain goats use. Or if you want to get technical, I believe it's the ibex. I just thought all goats love to climb, but maybe that's incorrect. However, in my mind they do like to climb, and therefore I had to build a climbing structure for them, which they do actually use, and I'm pretty impressed with the way that it's turned out. There is one item in the Barnyard Animal Pack which I really wish that they included as a single piece, and that is the cable reel benches. I feel like the cable reels are an absolute perfect item that we could have used freely within our zoos. Therefore, I decided to make my own. Janky as it is, it's not that bad. And it also works out pretty good if you want to make some climbing structures. Another item I absolutely love is these massive towers. They are fantastic. And I don't believe that they are actually part of the Barnyard Animal Pack because they don't have that tag, so it's probably just been added to the base game. With the habitat filling up nicely, I decided to add some rocks for a bit of texture and some terrain paint to outline where the heavy foot traffic is. With the classic rinse and repeat of adding more foliage to your habitat, we did in fact add more foliage. It was soon time to wrap this habitat up, but I wanted to add in a little bit more details around the hard shelter, and because I love this mechanism that is still extremely questionable, I decided to include it in the corner, along with some oil barrels and wooden barrels, because you just can't get enough barrels. We love barrels. And that, my friends, is the completion of the goat habitat and the end of day 3. Will I see you back for day 4? I sure hope so. Ah, I see you did return to day 4. Lovely to see you. Today is all about the Highland Coos, or as Planet Zoo calls them, the Highland cattle. Now, I knew exactly what I wanted to build for this habitat, and that is a barn. I think a lot of people, when you say barn, they'll picture a bright red barn with white trim, and it's very American. They even have a blueprint of that in the game. So if you're not much of a builder, then I would highly recommend you checking that out. However, I didn't want to use too many blueprints in this build. Therefore, I wanted to create my own barn. Now, as the zoo is relatively small, I didn't want it to be big. I also didn't want it to be red, so I've went for this really deep green colour, which I think actually blends in really well. I then finished off the barn by adding a couple of white trims around the edges, and then it was on to adding the door. Now, the door I have built here, I have used throughout the farm many a times. In fact, you will see it in our very next habitat, which is for the alpacas. Once the door was securely in place, we then moved on to adding the foliage to this habitat. With a couple of trees in the corner, I didn't want this habitat to feel overbearing, so I just added a couple of sprinkles of foliage and some rocks. To finish off this habitat, I added some decals around the barnyard area to give it that mucky, used feel. Well, we made it to day 5, and today we are building the entrance to our farm. The entrance building to me is one of those buildings that I just cringe when I think about building it. It's the first thing that your guests would see, and I feel like a lot of people put a lot of pressure to create this masterpiece. However, I wanted to dial that back. It doesn't have to be amazing, it just has to be functional. And this is why I included an information kiosk so the guests could get a maps or tickets to enter the farm. Personally, I think this entrance building is perfect for the size of our farm. And as we were on the final day of building, I didn't really have time to focus on anything bigger. And what you will see is that there is quite a lot of clutter at the front, which gives it a little bit more design. I then added in a second roof, just because I could, and a door so the staff could get into the information kiosk. I then added a white picket fence for security, and that was the entrance complete. I started off the alpaca habitat with this hard shelter, and added a couple bits of trim. I then used the door from the Highland Coos habitat. I told you I'd use it everywhere. And then I added in this staff gate, which doesn't function at all, but looks pretty cool. To jazz up the habitat, yes, I just said the word jazz, I added in some hay bales, barrels, and this awesome looking cart. One thing I've never mentioned throughout this whole entire project is I am building while welfare turned off. Every now and then I do like to click on a guest to get their opinion of my farm. Out of all the habitats that I have built, they seem to have the highest opinion of the alpaca habitat, mentioning that there's far too many flowers. But funnily enough, the alpaca always like to stay on that hill. Despite knowing this information that the guests don't particularly like the flowers in the habitat, I do, so I'm keeping it in there. And I'm going to add some trees as well. Because a tree is a tree, my friend. Now, I know what you're thinking, but Gemma, where are the chickens? Well, in all honesty, I wanted the whole entire zoo to be the chickens' habitat. However, due to multiple escapes and dehydrated chickens, it just wasn't feasible. So I had a look at the Zoopedia and found that the chickens have a habitat bonus when you put them in with the pigs. So they're now roommates. This has been my biggest challenge in Planet Zoo yet, and to be honest, I didn't think I could make it. But with a lot of sleepless nights, it goes to show that when you put your mind to it, you can build a habitat for every animal in the Barnyard Animal Pack.